Tuscan orange grapefruit. My God, America is imploding.
Oh, sorry, I was sending a tweet. Hello, welcome to Fanzone. We've got another match for you. This match is a doozy. We've got two people here who you've seen around the Fanzone debate judging recently, but these two players haven't played in a little bit. It is Caleb Boatman versus Doug Cassel. Should be a very interesting match. We are going to bring in the judges first of all. First off, it's Nick Tuig. Nick, you look very comfy. How are you?
I'm very comfortable. I feel judging is much more stress-free than all the playing I've been doing. So I'm in my old man chair, and I'm excited to watch Boatman and Doug fight. That's all I've ever wanted.
All you need is like a monocle, a pipe, and maybe like a scotch too, and you would like complete in a furnace, maybe a fire. Yeah, you would complete the whole thing there. On the other judging seat today, we've got Robert Parker. Robert, how the fuck are ya?
I am the fuck good with all of your colorful metaphors.
Yes.
I'm good. Like Nick said, judging is a little bit more stress-free. I don't have an old man chair. I'm not quite as comfy. I do have a soft blanket should I need it. Should it get cold in the winter for as long as this match goes on. But no, this should be a good one.
All right. So the last time that what the hell just happened? Macaw making noises in the background. Jesus Christ. We're going to leave it in. The last time we saw these players, Boatman actually played in an exhibition match against Cody earlier in the year. But before that, Boatman made a little bit of a run in the singles tournament we had at the beginning of the season before we transferred over to Fanzone. He lost to Jacoby Bancroft in the speed round, I believe. So that was a very close match. And then the last time we saw Doug was actually in one of our 3-person matches at the end of last season. So he's been gone for a while. He was helping us judge a lot, but now he's back in the player's seat. So let's actually talk to Mr. Cassel first. Doug, hello, welcome. You are on the opposite end of things this time. You are looking to get your first win on your record here in debate. How are you feeling about going up against Boatman?
I'm feeling pretty good. I guess I'm gonna try to feel good. Also, Nick wanting me and Boatman to fight. Why? Is it entertaining? But I like your comfy chair. I wish I had one myself. But I'm excited to be here.
Fair enough. Yes, now we will bring in Mr. Boatman. Boatman, welcome. I'm going to move you down there. Jeez, you're not a judge today. My God. Are you excited for the match? The last time we saw you, you were playing Jacoby. That was before we had Warzone things in debate. So you were just debating fandom stuff. Now you get to stretch your legs with your Warzone stuff. How are you feeling about the match?
I'm very good that I actually get to fight about movies I like. So this will be fun. And I'm very happy I get to debate against the lead singer of Good Charlotte. I think that's going to be so much fun. It's a new day, but it all feels old. It's a good life. That's what I'm told. But seriously, I love Doug. Who doesn't love Doug? Doug's the best. We've already faced each other in technically not this, but like we did in when it was called another thing.
You were part of that 3-person match.
Yeah,
was that your first win?
Yeah, that was my first win.
Well, shows how much I know about the league that I run. Okay, well, we are going to get right into it. Again, this match is actually going to be for seeding for the tournament starting in January. So this has no bearing on the current title picture that we have going on. But whoever wins this match will get a higher seeding in the tournament. And who knows, whoever loses might get knocked out of the tournament. We'll find out at the end of the match. So with that, we are going to start right away with question number 1. This is how it's going to work. I am going to ask the question. The competitors have prepped. They are going to have 1 minute to open an argument, 5 minute of free form to argue back and forth. and then 1 minute of closing. Then myself, along with Nick and Robert as the judges, will decide who won the fight. The first person to 3 is the winner. We have 4 prepped questions ready. If we end those 4 in a tie, 2-2, we will go to a bonus speed round question and explain the rules of that then when we get to it. So with that, we are going to start with question number 1, which is a category that Boatman drafted. It is in the Warzone category of directors, specifically Spike Lee. And what is the most overrated Spike Lee film? So Boatman, you drafted this. You have 1 minute to open your argument when you start talking.
As someone who just recently went through Spike Lee's entire filmography, I can tell you he is a very varied filmmaker in a sense of he makes a lot of different films ranging in quality from bad to good. I would argue he's a lot more underrated films than overrated films. But if I had to pick one film that I would give the mantra of most overrated, the film that had the most praise that it was not deserving of, I would give it to Da 5 Bloods, the most recent Spike Lee film. I think it's a film that is getting way more love just because of the way it was released. Like, it was released up against nothing. Nobody really has anything to watch. They're loving it because I don't want to say, but like there are certain kind of things that have surrounded the film that have kind of given it more clout. But I think overall, like, I think this is a film that really meanders. It's scatterbrained and it doesn't work as a whole.
All right. We will move over to Mr. Cassel. Doug, most overrated Spike Lee film. You have 1 minute when you start talking.
All right. So the most overrated Spike Lee film, without a doubt, is She's Gotta Have It. It's a direct, it's one of his first films that he's done. But actually, when you look at that film, it's actually been done better as a TV series. And I think the praise that gets is a little bit of nostalgia for, Spike Lee's earlier work. And I don't think you really have the ability to explore it in the film as much as you do in the TV series. And I think the TV series does it better. So I think more praise needs to go towards that, which it's not. It's giving more praise to a movie in which is kind of dated now. And I think the TV series gave it a more updated feel and gave you more of what everybody was kind of looking for in that film. But yeah.
Okay. So Doug ending about 10 seconds early. Guys, you have 5 minutes of freeform. Remember, even back and forth. Don't talk over each other. I will come in to warn you when you have 1 minute. Don't let that bother you. 5 minutes when one of you starts talking.
My biggest problem with your argument, Doug, is that I would argue that She's Gotta Have It is not overrated because it's not very highly rated in the Spike Lee canon overall. The general consensus of She's Gotta Have It is, yeah, it's a decent debut that went to bigger things. Ultimately, as a whole picture, it is actually, I would argue, underrated more than anything because I think you got a lot of good characters, including Jamie, Graham, and Mars Blackman, who I think all kind of represent these 3 different sides of what Nola Darling wants.
Okay, I completely understand that, but here's my counter argument for you with the facts that this is actually held in high regards with a lot of his fans. People, when they say watch this movie, it's usually in top 2 or 3 because they think it's really a good movie. But if you can get the same kind of feel, actually better feel from a elongated form, which is a TV series, which I think this did it justice. You better go to that. With the 5 Bloods, this film hasn't had enough time to breathe. I don't know how you're saying it's overrated when it doesn't have enough time to breathe to even really, granted, we're in a quarantine, so people are really like, hey, watch that new Spike Lee movie, and it might be in your face right now, but when you let it die down and you let it breathe, I don't think it will be considered an overrated. I think it'll be rated just where it needs to be.
I mean, at the end of the day, the question isn't what will be the most overrated Spike Lee film 20 years from now. It's what is the most overrated Spike Lee film? And right now, in 2020, Da 5 Bloods is the most overrated Spike Lee film and is being put above films that are much better, that are generally in the top 5. Stuff like Do the Right Thing, Malcolm X, Black Klansman, 25th Hour, even stuff that I would argue is more underrated, such as Crooklyn or Clockers. Like, it is being put above those where She's Gotta Have It generally ranges in like the 8 to 9 range. And you're bringing up the TV show. Ultimately, the TV show was able to build off of the movie, which is a much short form version. And it came out 20, 30 years later. So I don't think it's fair to compare it to the TV show because the TV show is a different medium.
But I do think it's fair to compare because if it shows the fact that it's a better medium, that this should have been a TV show from the get-go. It would have flourished in the 90s. It would have flourished when it came out. But the thing is, when you're looking at it, you say it's 8 or 9, but that's your rating from you seeing it right now. I'm talking about Spike Lee fans overall. We'll put this as 2 or 3 because it's his directorial debut. It's something that he's like kind of like, this was so good for a first time. And then I compare it to things like Get Out. No, it's no comparison. Where The Five Bloods, majority of the praise comes from Chadwick Boseman's performance. That's what I hear about when I hear this. I don't hear it as a Spike Lee film. I hear it more about the performances. And I don't think overall you can judge a film and say that it's overrated when it's only been out a year. I think you do need time to let it breathe. I think you are stunned by that performance because I think Chadwick Boseman brings a performance that's really good in this movie. And I think that's what majority of people are talking about.
I agree that I think people need to let the film breathe, but the problem is that people are not letting the film breathe. They are putting it on high caliber, and they're acting like it's one of his best directorial efforts. They're talking about giving him Oscar nominations for this. They are talking about just Oscar praise in general when his films in the past, such as Crooklyn, Clockers, Jungle Fever, those films should have got Oscar attention. Those didn't, but now we are saying, now we're going to give it to The Five Bloods, which is, again, it's a scatterbrained, mediocre effort. She's Gotta Have It. You can say that I'm not saying that the TV show movie, I think both of those ultimately are 2 different mediums, and I think both versions work. I think the TV show is more of a different experience, but the movie itself, it's a 90-minute look at every character interacting with each other at the same time. You have Morris Blackman, who is, I think, one of Spike Lee's best characters. You also have Janie, who I think is kind of this in-between, and you have Graham, who I think is kind of just this repugnant jerk, but the guy who plays it so good at it. And I think Nola is one of Spike Lee's best female characters ever written.
Again, going down to characters, you're bringing it to characters. I'm bringing it to overall film. There's people that literally have it in their top 2 to 3 films of his films because it's directorial debut. But again, we're bringing it to directorial debuts. The reason that you're looking at it with other people that are doing it is because you look at people that have done it later than him and have done it so much better. But we're looking at a movie that should have been a show from the get-go.
Okay. So we are gonna start with Doug. Doug, you get
First.
1 minute to close your argument when you start talking.
Okay, so we're contemplating this argument completely about what the question is, and I agree with Boatman that the question is most overall Spike Lee film. When you look down at it, this film has had chance to breathe, it had chance to grow, and guess what? They chose to bring it into a TV market because the movie needed to breathe into a TV-esque film. People will tell me, this is one that you have to watch. I've watched all of Spike Lee's movies. This is not one that you have to watch. This is something you can skip over. The Five Bloods have not had a chance to grow. When you hear people talk about this movie, you hear people talk about the performance of Chadwick Boseman. Not anybody else in the cast. Not about the direction. You hear them talk about Chadwick Boseman. So I don't understand how it's an overrated Spike Lee film when you're not hearing about Spike Lee directing this movie. You're hearing about the performance of Chadwick Boseman.
Time. All right. Bring in Mr. Boat. 1 minute to close your argument when you start talking.
Okay, to kind of fact check Doug a little bit, She's Gotta Have It is not being put at the 2s and 3s and 1s on Spike Lee's ranking. I looked at Vulture, I looked at Gold Derby, I look at the Tomato Meter. That film is roughly around the 10 mark. Now, if you look at the same for The Five Bloods, Gold Derby puts The Five Bloods at 4, whereas it puts She's Gotta Have It at 10. Ultimately, The Five Bloods is a film that is being praised, and it's not just for Chadwick Boseman's performance, because if it's just a good performance, they would have Mo Better Blues much higher if they were only looking at performances for Denzel's. Ultimately, The Five Bloods is a movie that people love for the movie itself, even though it's a meandering mess, where She's Gotta Have It as a film that actually does its job better. And you can say, oh, compared to other debuts that came later, well, Spike Lee was made on She's Gotta Have It was made on a shoestring budget, and ultimately for its budget and its time, it was incredible for what it was able to do.
2, 1, time. Okay. All right. Let's bring in those judges. Comfy Nick looking stressed once again. Boatman, get out of that top row. Okay. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Judges, do we have our answers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first. This was really good, actually. I was surprised. I wasn't expecting the first one out of the gate to be this good. I thought this was a really good fight. I think what it comes down to for me was they were both kind of arguing the question a little bit differently. Boatman was more looking at it to like right now, like today, what is the most overrated? Doug was looking at it as like overall from beginning to end, like all time. At the end of the day, I'm going Boatman. And I think the thing that really got me was he kind of refuted the whole TV thing, which was a part of Doug's big argument, was that the TV series did it better. Boatman kind of had a good thing against that, being like, well, you know, it's a different type of medium, and that the movie, you know, just completely knocked down the fact that it's not in the top whatever, like Doug was saying. So I give it to Boatman, but Nick, I'll go to you next. What are you thinking?
So I was leaning one way after the openings and even a little bit into the main round, and then it was actually hard for me to make up my mind by the end. But something was said as a way to try to argue for one point, and it was actually when Doug said that people say it's really good for a debut film. So to me, Boatman sort of countered that why, because it's a debut film, that it should be, it's sort of looked at the correct way, as opposed to in comparison to the rest of Spike Lee and in comparison to the rest of everything else. So I went with Boatman.
Okay, so Boatman does win the first point. Robert, your vote did not count on this one, but where would you have gone and why?
I also would have said Boatman.
That's my favorite way my name is ever been spelled.
That's Boatman. It was a good argument. I agree with you, Tim. That was actually pretty close. The points that really got it for me in the closing, I think Boatman just summed up his argument a little bit better. It was a little bit neater of a conclusion as far as the debate style goes. I think there was a little bit too much repetition of the same words, the same points from Doug. There wasn't as much of a wrap up in the conclusion. Although I do think that Doug did have an excellent point that I didn't think Boatman countered quite as well as he could have, which when Doug was just talking about Chadwick Boseman, Boatman didn't bring up Delroy Lindo, which I think I have seen as the most praised for like a point in The Five Bloods. So that's just something I wanted to bring up too. But yeah, I think Boatman argued it just a little bit better.
All right, so Boatman does get point number 1. We are going to move on to question numero 2, which is a category that Doug drafted. It's the category of horror. Ooh, it is spooky time. Okay, the question is specifically in Stephen King adaptations. What is the worst Stephen King adapted movie? Lots of negativity here today on Fanzone. So we're going to start with Doug because he drafted this category. So Doug, you get 1 minute to open your argument. Worst Stephen King adapted movie.
Okay, guys, let me picture this movie, right? It's about a lawn service that brings people out, and the humans, like, they eat the grass. That sounds like a trippy fucking movie, right? No, we get a person who has a little mental handicap and is a little slower than others, and he gets to be God. He gets to have God's intelligence. And then ready for the CGI that we get? Hey, anybody else remember the fucking show Reboot? We get that on the film. This is by far the worst adaptation that Stephen King has ever had. He has come out and stated that he hates this movie with a passion, more so than The Shining. This is literally the only thing that has comparison to this is the title. Welcome to Lawnmower Man.
Okay. Ending about 5 seconds early. Mr. Boatman, 1 minute when you start talking.
Gentlemen, what makes something a bad movie? Now, some would say a bad movie is the most boring, it's the most bland, it's the most forgettable film. Some would say, no, it's the one that has the worst acting, it's the most just noticeably awful. It's got ridiculous story, ridiculous plot points, ridiculous acting, ridiculous on a technical level. What if I told you a film could be both? Absolutely awful in all the worst ways, but also completely bland, forgettable, and giving you nothing new. Welcome to The Dark Tower. Dark Tower is a film that is an adaptation of a beloved book series, but it takes out all the joy, interest, and everything, but still gives you awful performances from the main character who is one of the kids. And you also waste Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba in two of their worst performances they have ever given as actors. There is nothing enjoyable about The Dark Tower at all.
All right. Also ending about 5 seconds early. I believe Matthew McConaughey plays a man in black in
Plays
the Dark
Man in Black.
Tower, the
So
Man
does
in
Liam
Black.
Neeson.
So does Liam Neeson. Interesting. Okay, guys.
He should play a man in black.
When did he do it? Oh, wait, that's right. Not Batman Begins. Okay, guys. 5 minutes freeform. Dark Tower versus, what was it, Lawnmower Man?
Lawnmower Man.
All right,
Yeah.
5 minutes when you guys start talking.
All right, let me start this off. Boatman, I get your argument. I really do. Shit show of a movie. Really good pick. But guess what? This is worst Stephen King adaptation. Do you know how hard it is to be a worst adaptation when you have zero? I mean zero besides the title to do with the actual source material. Your book, your movie actually expands on the universe, believe it or not, expands on actually making a Stephen King film universe, whether you want to take it or not. It actually gives you can say their performances are weak, but that's actually the gunslinger. And that's actually that's Randall Flagg right on the screen, straight from the adaptation of the books. That's exactly who they are.
The question is not what is the most or what is the least faithful to the books. If that was the case, then you could feasibly argue Shining as worst Stephen King. The Shining is worst Stephen King adaptation. But if you came up here and argued The Shining is one of the worst Stephen King adaptations, then everyone would say you were crazy. We were talking about worst movie here, and ultimately, Lawnmower Man, though cheesy and laughable, there is a purpose for Lawnmower Man. You can get all your buddies together on a Saturday night and have a ball watching the awful CGI effects and have a good time with it. Ultimately, there is no purpose, no reason anyone would ever want to watch The Dark Tower. And ultimately, you can say, oh, it gives new things that were not in the books, or it accurately represents the books. Go read the books. Go read the books if you want the things that were accurately, if you want accurately representation but from the books, go read the books.
Some would actually say the worst adaptation is probably The Stand, which was the TV miniseries, but we'll digress that whole situation. It is the worst Stephen King adaptation movie. This is the movie that literally does nothing for the source material. It doesn't change it doesn't evolve the complex or the thoughts of the source material. It literally does nothing. This film, you say it's a great hang around and just laugh. I'll go watch The Room if I wanted to do that. I'll go watch Room and laugh around with my friends. The Room. I did it right first time. I did say it right the first time. But no, let's break it down. You have characters that are actually intrigued. You think they're not. The three leads actually do kind of manifest from the novel and adapt themselves to kind of advance the source material. Like you understand the complexity of the gunslingers. You didn't get that a lot in the book. You understand the complexity of those characters. Randall Flagg is a monster of a human being, and you see that with the murder scene of him murdering his the kid's parents. with Lawnmower Man, it's literally about a doctor who wants to play God
Let
and
Boatman-
give it to somebody. Sorry.
Yeah, so you don't really get that. There's not much complexity, at least coming across screen. That might be something that's in the book, but the actual complexity or conflict of the character, it doesn't exist. Ultimately, what you've got is a base book that people love, and everything maybe kind of sort of good about the movie is stuff that wasn't beaten out of the books. But ultimately, if you want that experience, just read the books. At the end of the day, you can say, "Oh, Lawnmower Man, it's nothing like the book." Ultimately, then you're getting a new experience from the book, and you can say, "Oh, I want to go watch Room if I want to watch a fun bad movie." But ultimately, if you want to watch a fun bad movie, you don't want to watch The Room again and again and again. Everyone has multiple bad, fun, guilty pleasures. That's why Cody YLS had a top 10 guilty pleasures list. Ultimately, Lawnmower has a purpose as a movie. The Dark Tower could have been a great adaptation. It could have been something else that was new and interesting. And ultimately, we just get something close enough to the books that it's not giving us a new experience, but also far away from us that we're never going to get a proper adaptation again because Hollywood has killed it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a quick question. I just want to yes or no. Are you a Stephen King fan? Are you a Stephen King fan?
I would consider myself
material.
a fan of the material.
Okay. So as a fan of Stephen King's material is super outlandish and out there. It's super like the ideas of this are incredible. Taking a lawnmower service that uses humans to clean the service as like animals, and like it's insane. You could have evolved that and made it into something that was really good, but you failed to do that, and you gave us something because they hoped that they got the same success that Pierce Brosnan gave to Bond, giving, or being that charismatic person. He can lead a screen. This is a shit show of a movie. I'm not talking about fun times. This is like watching Reboot on acid and being completely stoned out of your mind would not make this movie better.
At the end of the day, you keep coming back to certain parts of the book, but ultimately, again, I think this is a fun bad type of movie. It's ridiculous CGI, and that's fun. I love that effects.
Okay. Boatman, you get 1 minute to close your argument when you start talking.
Doug keeps bringing it back to, it would be so much better if it was a movie about people who actually ate the grass. I don't really want to see that. I don't need to see that. I don't think that's a down point for me, that this movie doesn't have humans actually eating grass. At the end of the day, that doesn't sell the movie for me. For me, again, I think Lawnmower, it is a movie that has a purpose. There is a reasonable situation in which you would watch The Lawnmower Man. There is not a reasonable situation in which you would watch The Dark Tower, because ultimately it's not fun for anyone in any purpose. You can't watch it as a fun bad movie because it's too boring and too bland, but you can't watch it as an actually introspective reflection of the books, because ultimately it's too ridiculous, it's too poorly acted. Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba are phoning it in the entire time. Ultimately, there's no purpose, no reason, no feasible scenario in which you would ever want to watch The Dark Tower.
One time. All right. Move over to Doug for his closing. 1 minute when you start talking.
Okay, so The Dark Tower is a movie, while yes, it wasn't the greatest when it comes to watching something that you're focused on. You're thinking you're getting The Dark Tower as a series into a film. But when you realize the ability that you can scare Randall Flagg, that's something that's never been seen except in The Stand. When you realize that the extermination of the gunslingers happens, and this is why the gunslinger doesn't want to take anybody on, that's what happens in this film. You see him evolve as a character to want to be able to take care of somebody and put them under the wing. And you see how maniacal Randall Flagg is from the murder that he does to the parents. While you can say what you want, there are people that are fans of this from the Dark Tower series. Whereas mine is literally the worst Stephen King adaptation, because of the fact is that it has nothing, zero, except for the title. Stephen King himself has said this is the worst adaptation because it has nothing to do with his books.
Whoo! We got another doozy on our hand, boys. I'm gonna stop moving, Boatman, because that's a lot of work. Oh man,
I'll do it.
Fair enough, fair enough. Shit. I'm really going back and forth here on this one. Are you guys good?
Yeah, I think I'm good.
All right, Robert, you get to go first because you didn't get your vote last time.
Okay. First, I just wanted to say I can't wait to hang around with my buddies on a Saturday night over some cold Busch Light and watch Room. That just sounds like so much fun to me.
Yeah.
As for the arguments, it was a lot of both players like just saying the same thing in a different way. Like Boatman was definitely talking about how it is not. Dark Tower isn't fun in any situation, whereas Lawnmower Man could be a fun time in certain scenarios. And Doug was just saying, well, my movie is the worst adaptation because it's nothing like the books, and it's also just a worse movie. So a little bit of semantics argument about, the worst adaptation as far as, staying faithful to the books versus just being the worst movie. Ultimately, I ended up going with Doug on this one. I think that, like I said, both players made a lot of decent arguments. I think in Doug's closing, it really won it for me when he started talking a little bit more in depth about some of the things that fans of the series could find to be somewhat interesting about the movie. That was really a halfway, or it was a pretty good counter to Boatman's main point of, there's no enjoyment at all to be found in this, and Doug found those few small pockets where, well, you know what, dedicated book readers could find this interesting. So with that point, I had to give it to Doug.
All right, I'll go next. Like Robert said, I think there was a bit of a semantics thing going on with the question. At the end of the day, the question reads exactly worst Stephen King adapted movie. So to me, I had to give it to Doug. I think his point about it has nothing to do with the movie. And even I think he countered Boatman's thing about, it's not a fun movie to get around and hang out with your friends and watch, but fans of Stephen King actually have something to like in the Dark Tower. There could be something to like there in the Dark Tower. And while Dark Tower might not have great performances or anything, it at least has a Stephen King world that people can appreciate, whereas Lawnmower Man has nothing. So that's what won it for me. Nick, your vote didn't count. Where would you have gone?
I actually was leaning towards Boatman. Doug had me out of the opening, but then Boatman convinced me that maybe the semantics of it isn't necessarily like from book to movie, given that The Shining is good and it's not faithful to the movie. And that was sort of Doug's whole argument. So once Boatman put me off of that, I needed to hear more specifics about the movie Lawnmower Man and why it's bad, and I didn't hear enough. I think Doug countered a lot of the Dark Tower well, but at the end of the day, there were still like the performances and things about the Dark Tower that Boatman sold me on. And I just didn't hear enough about Lawnmower Man. But who gives a shit what I said?
This is why we have 3 judges, because we all think a little differently. All right. So with that, Doug gets his first point. It is 1-1 as we get into question number 3, which is a category that Boatman drafted. It is the category of Fandom Oscars. Ooh, Fandom Oscars. Okay. The question is, what fandom film should have been nominated for Best Director that wasn't? No Dark Knight trilogy, so no Christopher Nolan. All right, again, what fandom film should have been nominated for director that wasn't? So Boatman, you get to start on this one. 1 minute to open your argument when you start talking.
I picked a person who I think added so much to the film that he directed that the movie that he did felt completely different to the films in the franchise that had come before. I'm going with Alfonso Cuarón for Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Ultimately, what Cuarón did with that film is with everything, the cinematography, the shots, the editing, the pacing, stuff like just little things like the Something Wicked This Way Comes. There are so many little things that Cuarón added that makes the movie feel completely different. It makes it feel adult, which is exactly what the tone needs to feel like, because it needs to feel more intense than the last 2 Columbus films. Ultimately, Cuarón is a director who should have been nominated, especially in a year that was a little bit weaker, like the 2004 release filmed director nominations, which was not a stacked year for movies as far as directors, the directing nominations.
Okay, ending about 5 seconds early. We'll bring in Doog. You get 1 minute when you start talking.
All right. So I put up James Mangold for Logan. I think this movie was such a different pace for a superhero movie. It inevitably became something that outlived its even source material. It's something that it surpassed just regular comic book movies for most people. This was a film. It was a beautiful film, and to not give it the recognition that it deserves was ridiculous. It doesn't matter who you put it up against. This film was ridiculously gorgeously shot. It had such substance to it. It had such a beautiful father-daughter relationship in the movie that you just follow and fall in love with, and brings people that are fans of comic books into a world where they didn't think they were ever going to really see. Like, to think that you're going to get a Western out of this is something that nobody really thought until we saw that first trailer.
All right. We'll bring back in Mr. Boatman. Prisoner of Azkaban versus Logan. Alfonso Cuarón versus James Mangold. 5 minutes freeform. Let's do it.
My biggest problem with your argument here, Doug, is you picked one of the most stacked best director classes ever in Oscar history. You're expecting us to want to take out either Guillermo del Toro for The Shape of Water, Christopher Nolan for Dunkirk, Jordan Peele for Get Out, Greta Gerwig for Lady Bird, or PTA for Phantom Thread. I think even if you don't love all those movies, all 5 of them showed how masterful they are as directors, and they deserve to be nominated that year. I wouldn't take any of them out.
My problem is I'm not trying to take anybody out. I think we should expand the category. Like it should have been expanded for a while. There's too many people that are deserving of it. Do I think that it should have gotten overlooked? Absolutely not. You say those films shouldn't have been overlooked. I think Logan is a stunning, if not beautifully directed film, more so than Phantom Thread. If we're going to take people out. It's a film that broke people's hearts. It was a 20-year. It was basically almost a 20-year long saga with somebody, and you're finally seeing them go out the right way.
Well, you just brought up the point that it's a film that has the benefit of a 20-year-long saga, and ultimately we have a lot of attachment to that character. So ultimately, a movie where Wolverine dies is ultimately always going to have a precious part in people's thoughts. But let's look at your counter argument there, because ultimately you're saying, well, let's just expand the category, not take anybody out. That's not the world we live in. We live in a world where there were only 5 nominations. And ultimately, you have to take someone out. And then you're saying, well, maybe let's take out PTA. PTA had so much attention to detail in the costumes design, the cinematography, that even if you don't like Phantom Thread as a story, that movie was so meticulously crafted. You can't deny that Paul Thomas Anderson should have gotten a nomination.
But when you think of a film, are you thinking about the set pieces, or are you thinking about the characters that impact your viewpoints that you're taking? That's what you think about when you watch a film. You can say, this is beautiful. This is beautifully shot. Well done. But when somebody can take a comic book film, something that shouldn't be recognized in the Oscars normally, in their eyes, we don't recognize comic book movies. Those are trash movies. Well, here's what happens. When you have a beautifully directed film, people get mad because you don't give it the attention that it deserves.
Ultimately, right, you're looking, you just said, oh, well, what do you look more in a movie? Well, the category isn't Best Picture. If we were arguing what movie should have been nominated for Best Picture, then sure, we can have a conversation about Logan maybe going in over one of the films that didn't, like The Post. But ultimately, Spielberg wasn't nominated for Best Director. Paul Thomas Anderson was, Greta Gerwig was, Jordan Peele, Christopher Nolan, Guillermo del Toro. All of those 5, you just admitted the attention to set piece wasn't as important in Logan. Paul Thomas Anderson did. Ultimately, bringing it back to Prisoner of Azkaban, that was a much less stacked class of directors. You can easily take out Taylor Hackford, who adds nothing to the film for Ray. That's a good movie with a good performance. Taylor Hackford adds nothing. That movie could have been directed by literally anyone else. Same with Mike Leigh for Vera Drake. Ultimately, you have 2 that you can easily swap out and no one would blink an eye. Ultimately, all 5 of your directors from your year cannot be removed, and that's the biggest problem, is ultimately you just picked too stacked of a year. You picked a movie you really liked, and you can argue other categories, but director, that stays solidly firm.
Okay, so here's the other ones that you can get rid of. Christopher Nolan, you could take Dunkirk out. That's a divisive film at best. At best, no one thinks it's really that great of a film. Has no story. Literally is just a visual. Sure, give it visual effects. Sure, you want to give it something, give it that. But direction, it has none. When it comes to James Mangold and Logan, this has a definitive direction. You see everything, the full arc. As your film is beautifully shot. It is a great, beautifully shot film. I will give it. Give it cinematography. Absolutely. But this film, it has problems. It's missing key points out of the novel that were actually taken out because of your director. So your director actually hurt the film when it came down to it. And this is speaking to someone that this is one of his favorites out of the series. But it still takes parts out of the novel that literally hurt the film. You don't find out
because ultimately you're comparing it to the novel. We are not looking at it in comparison to the novel. We are looking at it as a final product, and as a final product, I don't know what was in the novel, and I don't care. Ultimately, as the film, it is the perfect final product. And again, ultimately, you're arguing better film with Logan, not better direction. Nolan, we're not going to take Nolan out. Nolan masterfully crafted everything.
Please strike from the record, crafted everything. Okay. Doug, you now have 1 minute to close your argument when you start talking.
You can say what you want about it just being said that it's a beautiful film or it's just the best film. I'm talking about his direction, because without his direction, it wouldn't have worked as well. James Mangold was invested in those characters and giving those characters exactly what you needed. I gave you 2 films that you could take off the best directors list because of the fact is that you got to recognize that those aren't as great as Logan. They're not. Storytelling wise, they're not as great as Logan. Your film, the reason it doesn't deserve best direction is because it's not the direction that gets you in with that film. It's the beautiful cinematography that gets you in with that film. There's nothing that's really inspiring as the directions go into the movie. It's more so the cinematography, how beautiful everything looks, how beautiful it just feels when you're there. But overall, the direction in Logan is 10 times better than what you're giving it credit for.
All right, Mr. Boatman, 1 minute to close your argument when you start talking.
Doug is literally saying that my film is great because of the way it feels, the way it looks. That is the job of a director. Ultimately, the job of a director is the way the film looks, the way the film feels, the performance of the actors, all the technical aspects. If you want to talk about what had the better story, well, ultimately, then you can talk about what should have been nominated for screenplay, but that's not the question here. We're talking about director. And as a director, Alfonso Cuarón did everything perfectly right. And again, he did it in a year where you can take somebody out easily. Taylor Hackford and Mike Leigh, you can throw out easily. Again, Doug, when he first heard it, he wanted to expand the category of directors because he knew that ultimately it was a category that was very, very, very stacked. And ultimately, you have to make ticky-tacky arguments to disqualify Christopher Nolan and Paul Thomas Anderson, who ultimately do everything as their job as a director to make that film great. You can have problems with the screenplay or other elements, but ultimately, as a director, everyone in Doug's class is doing a perfect job, whereas you can remove Taylor Hackford and Mike Leigh.
Time. All right. Let's bring in the judges, and then we'll bring in them competitors. Whoo, boy. All right. Do we have our answer, judges?
No.
Well, good, because Nick, you're going first.
Hey, Boat, this has been a fun fight so far.
Thanks.
Nick, you're going to make me edit.
Keep it in.
The suspense.
Are you frozen, or are you really thinking that hard?
He might actually be frozen.
I think he's frozen.
Wait, Doug, are you actually?
I don't think he'd be able to stick with the bit this long.
I thought he was, because he just went, no, and now he's like really.
Oh yeah, he's definitely actually frozen.
Okay, well, we're gonna leave in the part of Nick cutting out, but we're back. We have the votes. Nick, you get to go first. Where are you leaning and why?
Well, this fight was so long ago, but this was probably the toughest one so far. Boatman sort of made Doug fight his fight in the sense that Doug seemed to want to talk more about why the film is good, and Boatman seemed to want to talk more about why you can't replace someone else who was nominated that year. And Doug sold me on replacing Nolan. He didn't have to say much about Dunkirk, but what he did say, I understood, and I felt that. And then Doug talked a lot about the character arcs and the storytelling and how committed Mangold was to Logan, whereas I didn't hear a whole lot of specifics about the Prisoner of Azkaban from Boatman. So I think Doug fought Boatman's fight better than Boatman fought Doug, so that's why I'm going with Doug.
Okay, Robert, you go next.
I drew a boat and put some men. So I have Boatman. I think Boatman did give me enough in argument for Cuarón. He did talk about the pacing, the editing, the shot composition, some of that kind of stuff. I think when Doug brought in the storytelling compared to the book, Boatman countered that really, really well. And I think it was a classic example of make you fight my fight. You know, the question didn't say and pick somebody to replace in that Oscars year. Boatman brought that into the fight, and Doug, I think, could have maybe argued that just by saying, hey, it's hypothetical. We don't have to take somebody out. That's not the fight I'm going to fight. And I think then it would have been a slightly different argument. But I think Doug did get sucked into that fight just a little bit too much. And I think every time he did talk about, PTA or Dunkirk, I think Boatman did have the argument that even if you don't like those movies, which I personally don't love either of those movies, they're still crafted in such a way that deserves that Oscar nomination.
All right. The fate of these gentlemen is in my hands for this question. I agree with Nick in that I thought Doug came in towards the end there with the story, the characters. But I think it was a little bit too late for me. I'm going with Belloc Manboat. And yeah, I think that Boatman did a good job of going against pretty much all of Doug's arguments except for that one, but it came in the last minute from Doug. So everything Doug had kind of said beforehand, I thought Boatman was able to retaliate really well. And again, I agree with Robert. I felt like I got a lot from Boatman about why Cuarón should have been nominated for director. And I think Doug talked a lot about why the movie should have gotten more recognition in a lot of areas, but not necessarily director until the very end. So I give it to Boatman or Belloc Manboat, however you want to say it, my future Jack of all trivia name when I enter that arena as Belloc Manboat. Okay. So with that, it is 2-1 in favor of Boatman. So Doug does need this final question in order to make it to the speed round. Let's get into the final question, and that is the final prep question, I should say. It's in the category of Planet of the Apes, specifically the Matt Reeves directed trilogy or the Matt Reeves directed movies. So Dawn and War. The question though is best character in the New Apes trilogy other than Caesar. So with that, you could have picked any from the trilogy. Let's start with Doug since he drafted this. Doug, 1 minute when you start talking.
Gary Oldman's performance as Dreyfus is one of probably the best performances outside of Caesar's in this entire trilogy, even if you include the first. When you look at Gary Oldman's performance, you see a man who's haunted, and you see somebody who's trying to make his people survive, even if he's using not so nice tactics. We'll just say not so nice tactics. I think when you look at the character as a whole, it's a person who is literally haunted by past mistakes and wants to make something better for the human race, and doesn't matter who he hurts. Him and Martin have a relationship sorta to another character and another character, and they're kind of mirror images of each other, and it shows you how diabolical the human race can be in this one character. One bad day can change a person to be a monster.
Time. All right. Let's move over to Boatman. Best character in the Apes trilogy.
I'm going with the character who is kind of the anti-Caesar, not in a sense of he's the exact opposite of Caesar in every way, but in a sense of he is the opposite of Caesar's philosophies. Both Caesar and Koba have experienced trauma and tragedy at the hands of the human race, but ultimately Koba and Caesar both have different philosophies. Koba has been changed and dramatically altered by these experiences, and he is more driven by revenge due to his traumatic experiences. He does not have sympathy at all for the human race, and in a sense, that also bleeds into him not having sympathy for Caesar, because ultimately he sees Caesar as too close to attach to the human race, whereas that brings the good conflict in. When fighting oppression, where is the line? Where is it the point of we want to be peaceful in resolution? Where's the point of we want revenge? And I think Koba brings that dynamic to the film.
Time. All right. Koba versus Dreyfus. 5 minutes when one of you starts talking.
Our characters are very much mirrored. Martin and Dreyfus and Caesar and Koba, they have basically the same kind of outlooks. One's trying to do it peacefully, one's trying to do it with violence. Where do our characters differ is the question, because we both kind of chose the same character, and our characters different is the humanity. There's something that you can relate to. When you see Dreyfus break down after seeing his family, it's something that makes you remorseful for that character, and you kind of understand what he's doing. Koba literally becomes just violence, because we can't include the first movie. Koba becomes just violence, and you're going off of just that performance alone. You don't get his whole arc.
Wait, what? I don't believe that was. I would like a judge's help in that, but we did not. We said best character in the trilogy.
Yeah, you can use stuff from the first movie in there. You can.
Okay.
I'll give you an extra 10 seconds, but yes, you can talk about things Koba as a character in the trilogy. Yes.
Okay.
Leading into it.
Okay, so ultimately on that point, you can use Koba's full arc, and ultimately Koba does have that full arc, and you can say, oh, well, he goes all violence, but that's because of the 2-movie arc transformation that he has. Ultimately, Dreyfus, what you're getting, you're saying our characters are parallel, and that's correct, but you're getting a shortened, less developed version of the Koba arc, and ultimately that's the difference. And I don't think you can really bring in humanity as a point, because we're talking about apes versus humans, and I would argue Koba even shows more humanity because you get that transformation over a longer period of time, and we understand why Koba is who he is.
Dreyfus does something that Koba can't do in this film. Dreyfus makes Caesar retaliate. Dreyfus kills his family. You should not feel bad for this character at all because of what he does to Caesar. Koba, you can feel bad for. If we're going to include the whole arc, you can feel bad for because of the abuse that he went through as growing up in the institution that he grew up in. But when you look at characters overall, someone that makes you at a certain point feel remorseful for them in the short amount of time, that's the real emphasis. What can make a powerful character powerful? One film, you remember Dreyfus, and it's intense what you remember him for.
Ultimately, you just said, oh, well, Dreyfus is a complicated character. You feel for him when he breaks down, but now you're saying, well, Koba's bad because you feel for him. You get a sense in the first movie, whereas Dreyfus makes Caesar retaliate. So I don't know exactly what you want from Koba. Do you want him to be peaceful or do you want him to be violent? Ultimately, he does both, and that's what he does. You get the transformation of the character. You can say, well, Koba didn't kill Caesar's family, but ultimately that's just not Koba's ultimate goal. I don't think that's a strike against Koba because he didn't specifically target Caesar because Caesar wasn't his specific target. The human race was. Whereas Dreyfus, yeah, the apes were a specific target. That doesn't make the character better.
No, what makes the character better is the arc that the character sees in a film, and he does it in one film. Koba has to take 2 films, and then they have to throw in that he's haunting Caesar at the end of the 3rd film or during the 3rd film. But what you get with Dreyfus is a full character arc in one movie. This is a rememberable character from one movie. Koba's been around since the beginning. And here's the thing. He doesn't just portray humanity. He portrays his own kind. And it's not like he just doesn't portray just Caesar. He portrays everybody in the group. What happens is you have a character where they didn't know what to do with him during the 2nd film because the villain was going to be Dreyfus. And they were like, oh, let's go ahead and make him a little bit more meaner and let him portray Caesar at the end. And then we have something really good going on. But what you have with Dreyfus is a full-fledged character arc in one film.
Ultimately, you have a arc in one film.
Minute.
It's the way he changes. Dreyfus changes from here to here, but ultimately, you're not getting a full-fledged character arc. You're getting maybe 30 minutes, 20 minutes of a character arc. You're not getting that full character arc because we've got so much going on in this movie. We've got the dam, we've got Caesar, we've got Koba, we've got all these elements going on. Koba has the full amount of time to actually get that full arc. So ultimately, just saying because it's done in one movie, it's not done as well at the end of the day. Koba, we get the full sense of his transformation into why exactly he is violent and why he would betray his own kind. Ultimately, we understand everything that Koba does to a T because Koba and Caesar have that dynamic where they had the same circumstances, but it's the way Koba reacted to him, and we understand him completely.
I disagree. You get a full arc with Dreyfus, and you get the emotional stance. You see where he started out beginning before the infection. You see where the infection took him, and you see what happens at the end of his life.
All right. We are going to go to Boatman for a 1-minute closing when you start talking.
Just because you get the full life of Dreyfus, you don't get the full fleshed out version of it. You are seeing little specks along the way of Dreyfus, but ultimately you still got so much to juggle in that movie that a lot of that elements get lost within the film. And ultimately you can bring up, oh, people remember Dreyfus. People remember it because it's Gary Oldman in one of his best performances ever. And that is not a plus towards the character because we were talking about best character as far as what it's written, not in terms of the best acted or best performance. Ultimately, Gary Oldman adds so much to that performance. And without Gary Oldman, you don't have as much. Toby Kebbell, sure, you can argue is adding so much. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Toby Kebbell, it's a lot of CGI, it's a lot of computer animation, but it's about the dynamic with him and Caesar, and that's what's important here. And ultimately, Koba is a character that changes significantly throughout the series, and we completely understand who Koba is, why he is that way. It's a completely fully fleshed out arc, unlike Dreyfus, which is a half-assed arc at the end of the day. Ultimately, Koba is a complex character.
All right. We are going to move over to Doug. Doug, 1 minute to close your argument when you start talking.
When you say Koba is a fleshed out character and you see his arc change, Koba is the same exact character that he is in the first movie, that he is in the second movie. That's why he dies. That's why he haunts him the way that he does. He couldn't change him. He couldn't help him. Caesar couldn't help him. But Dreyfus, you see the overarching of the character. I talk with my hands. You see the overarching of the character. You see him, why he lost his family and how it hurt him and how he wants to protect humanity, doing it at all costs, killing Caesar's family, then going ahead and ending everything. Just, it's a character arc that's kind of beautiful for the film. You remember this character arc. You say it's 20-30 minutes, but I remember the 20-30 minutes that he's in because of how well it's written. And it's Gary Oldman, so it makes the performance even 10 times better with how well the character's written. So I don't understand why you're saying he's not fleshed out, because if he wasn't fleshed out, you would not remember him as a villain and how terrifying he was. Koba was the same character throughout the entire series. He didn't change. There was no character arc. There was no character evolution.
Time. Okay. Bring in dem judges. Bring in dem players. I will go first. I think at the end of this question, this was more of a, who has the best character arc kind of question, which I guess kind of bleeds into the who is the best character. It's tough. There's one thing here that had Boatman said would have won him the point in a landslide lock for me. Dreyfus had nothing to do with killing Caesar's family. That was the Colonel in the third movie, Woody Harrelson. That was not Dreyfus. Nothing to do with Gary Oldman. Had Boatman mentioned that, that would have been an instant win for me, because it was just it was a big part of Doug's argument.
I was so confused when he said that too.
Yeah. That being said, I am still going with Boatman. Sorry to tease you there, Doug, but
Now you're really teasing me.
there we go. I think that at the end of the day, Boatman gave me a better picture as to what, because it came down to being an argument about the arcs of the characters. Boatman gave me a better picture of Koba's story, his face-off with Caesar, and a big part of Doug's argument was that they're similar characters, and Boatman rebutted that with basically saying, sure, and Koba's done better. So to me, that's kind of what won it for me. But Nick, we will go to you next. Where are you aiming?
Yeah, I was very confused for parts of the argument. But you're right, Boatman didn't come back and say that or refute that point. So had I been a person that hadn't seen the Apes movies, I would have come out of this fight thinking Dreyfus killed Caesar's family and had this crazy arc and showed what a great villain he is. So that really was a knock against a Boatman there. But I agree with you, Tim, that at the end of the day, they both agreed that these were kind of the same characters. And Boatman gave me a little more as to how Koba developed in terms of his relationship with Caesar. And that Dreyfus was just sort of a watered-down version of what Koba's character was. So the win goes to Boatman. All
right, Robert, your vote didn't count. Where would you have gone and why?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you said it did come down to arcs, and ultimately, I don't know if either of these characters really have an arc where their change start to finish. Both of them are complex, certainly, but I don't know if they're both have an arc where they change. Ultimately, I would have liked to hear a little bit more from Boatman about Koba's presence in the third film. I think that is an extremely important aspect of his character. And ultimately, I would have loved to hear more from Doug about how Dreyfus is complex. We talked about how his history with his family, there's essences of humanity, but that doesn't really contribute to an arc. Ultimately, like you guys said, they agreed that both of their characters are similar, and I think Boatman did a better job of talking about how his character is more complex and deeper and better. So I said Boatman, and I do have to give it to Boat.
All right. Well, with that, your winner, Caleb Boatman. Final score 3-1. A very close match overall. Boatman, we'll start with you. You won the match. You are now going to be, you were ranked number 8. You are going to go up in the ranks in the tournament coming up in January. How are you feeling getting another win on your record? You're now 2-1.
I feel decent. I mean, yeah, Doug fought a good fight. He fought really hard. He did a really good job. If I'll be honest, I expected to get the Stephen King point. I did not expect to get the Planet of the Apes point. Those kind of got swapped. But at the end of the day, points are points, so I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't know who you're facing next, but you'll be in the tournament facing somebody. So is there anybody that you know of that's in the roster that you just really want to fight?
I want to stay above 500, so someone bad. Not Cody. I already fought Cody.
I was about to say you already did that. Doug, we'll move over to you. Unfortunately, didn't get the win today, but I think all 4 of these fights were pretty close when it comes down to it. So you fought your heart out. I loved watching it today. How are you feeling post match?
Man, it was fun playing Bowman. That's all I gotta say. I mean, it was a blast. I always like it when you can play with somebody who's kind of you're cool with, and you don't have to yell at each other.
That's fair. That's always fair. Again, I have to work out the rankings. But if you make it into the tournament next season, is there anybody that you want to play?
Not Boatman, so I can play somebody different.
I do feel bad. Both of Doug's losses have come from me now. Isn't he 0-2?
He is 0-2 now. Yeah. You guys were the only.
Been someone different, Tim.
I didn't know. I wasn't in charge then. Nobody
we need
told
to
me.
fire whoever used to be in charge.
That's gonna be a yikes from me, dog. Okay.
I'm
Well,
kidding,
guys,
Coho, I love you.
it wasn't Coho.
Oh,
Okay.
it wasn't. I thought it was. Oh, I stand by my statement.
Guys, well, thank you for coming to watch this episode of Fanzone. Next week, we have another big match. We're going to find out who is going to play Caleb Coho in a number one contenders match. It's going to be either Nazario Montenegro or Jacoby Bancroft. They are going head-to-head in 2 weeks in the next match. So be on the lookout for that one. That's going to be a good one. The winner of that, like I said, goes on to play Caleb Coho for a number one contenders match. So, guys, with that, this has been Fanzone. Thank you to Doug. Thank you to Boatman and the judges, Robert and Nicholas, and a backstage brief performance from Cody Newberry. So, thank you so much, guys. We'll see you next time. Remember, I was just sending a tweet.
Michelob Ultra Tuscan Orange Grapefruit. My God, America is imploding.